Hello everyone, I'm Aileen Carroll, sommelier with Lynfred Winery. Thank you so much for joining us for this summer installment of our virtual guided tasting series featuring our refreshing Seyval Blanc. It's actually made from grapes grown right here in the Midwest. As you may or may not know, Lynfred Winery actually gets its grapes from all over the world, from Chile to California to right here in Illinois. This is a vertical tasting today, meaning we have 3 different vintages of wine made from the same grapes. So we have our 2016, 2017, and 2018 Seyval Blanc. Even though we have all the same grape in each of these wines, where exactly in the Midwest the grapes come from is slightly varying between the vintages. So we have one that is made from grapes grown entirely in Michigan, one made from grapes grown entirely in southern Illinois, and the last one is a mix of the two. Now, the fun part about this tasting today is I'm not going to tell you which is which until the end, but I am going to give you all the tools that you'll need to be able to decipher, based on how the wines taste, which one comes from where, because, as I'll be explaining, different growing conditions affect the ripening of the grapes, and that in turn affects the taste of the wine. So this vertical tasting will give us a really cool chance to hone in on exactly what those different growing conditions do in terms of affecting the final taste of the wine. Now, because we do have all 3 grapes the same, the differences between these wines are going to be quite subtle, but I'll also be giving you the tools you need to expand your tasting palette, some tips and tricks to pick out these nuances so that we'll be able to spot the differences between them. Sound cool? Alright, so by the end of this video, you'll have an understanding of the different factors that contribute to how a wine tastes, specifically how differences in growing conditions affect the grapes and affect the final quality of the wine. You'll also learn the origin of Seyval Blanc, as well as the difference between a cross and a hybrid. And I'll be giving you a really helpful framework for expanding your tasting skills and being able to pick out these different nuances. And finally, you'll also be learning some food and wine pairing principles for white wines that'll allow you to make excellent pairings for these Seyval Blancs. Let's get started. We'll begin with a really quick layout of the 3 main factors that affect how a wine tastes. First, of course, we have the grapes themselves with all of their interesting and unique inherent characteristics, aromas, and flavors. Since, again, we have all 3 of the same grapes featured here, any differences that we're tasting aren't going to be coming from differences in the grapes. The second thing that affects how a wine tastes are the growing conditions of the grapes. There is a fancy French word for this called terroir, which refers to all the geographic and climatic factors that affect the ripening of the grapes and the resulting taste of the wine. And it includes not just climate, but also the specific soil type in an area, as well as weather differences from year to year, but we'll keep it pretty simple for today. Thirdly, the thing that affects how a wine tastes are going to be all the winemaking choices that occur in the winery. So even if you have the same type of grape grown in the same place, like a Napa Chardonnay, an oaked Napa Chardonnay is going to taste a lot different than an unoaked Napa Chardonnay. But for our vertical tasting today, all 3 of these wines were made in essentially exactly the same way. So, since they're the same grapes made in the same way, again, any differences that we'll be tasting are going to be the direct result of differences in growing conditions. Before we dive into the tasting, I do want to briefly explain the origin of Seyval Blanc, because it's not a grape that many people have heard of, and it was developed in France almost exactly 100 years ago in 1921. So most grapes that we know, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, are all technically the exact same species, Vitis vinifera, and it is a different species of grape than the grapes that we eat. Wine grapes are much smaller, they have much thicker skins, and a much richer juice. But even though all these wine grapes are exactly the same species, just like domestic dogs are all the same species, there is plenty of variation in the different in the different kinds of grapes, just like in the different kinds of dogs, and you can cross the different kinds of wine grapes to get even more, just like you can cross a Labrador and a Poodle and get a Labradoodle. Actually, Cabernet Sauvignon, as well as a lot of other popular grapes, are crosses of other older grapes. If you don't know what the two parent grapes of Cabernet Sauvignon are, think of the two parts of the name, Cabernet and Sauvignon. It's actually a cross of Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. Isn't that cool? So like the Labradoodle, Cabernet Sauvignon is also a cross. Now, there are actually other distinct species of grapes besides Vitis vinifera, which can be used to make wine. And when you cross their parentage with Vitis vinifera, the result is called a hybrid. So a cross is when you have two grapes or two things that are technically the same species and you cross them, like a Labradoodle, like Cabernet Sauvignon. And a hybrid is when you have two grapes or two things that are technically different species and you blend their genetics together. So like mule is a blend of a horse and a donkey, or a Liger is a mix of a tiger and a lion. So too, our Seyval Blanc here today is a hybrid. It is 50% Vitis vinifera, 37% Vitis rupestris, and 13% Vitis lysymcumi. I think I'm pronouncing that right. So obviously the question is, well, why would wine grape growers want to create these crazy hybrid Liger grapes? Good question, and there is a good answer. So these other grapes besides Vitis vinifera that are a part of the parentage of Seyval Blanc are able to grow in a much shorter period of time. They reach maturity more quickly, meaning they're ready to harvest sooner, meaning they're perfect to grow in places that have a slightly shorter growing season, meaning they're perfect grapes to grow right here in the Midwest where the growing season is relatively short. I know I want to taste the wine too, but I have to tell you one last thing before we start our first wine, because you'll need the clues and the tools necessary to pick out which of these features grapes that were grown in Michigan. That's actually going to be the easiest one to spot, so we're going to focus on that. So, as I mentioned, one of these is grown in southern Michigan, another made from grapes grown in southern Illinois, and another is the mix of the two. So, the difference between southern Michigan and southern Illinois is about 300 miles, and when you move 300 miles further south, you actually get 30 more sunny days in a year. So that extra sun is going to give the Illinois grapes a chance to get riper. They're going to develop more rich, fruity flavors, whereas the grapes grown in the less sunny conditions don't get quite as ripe. And instead of more pronounced fruit flavors, you have a little bit more of a minerality. But the most important difference between grapes grown in sunny versus not quite as sunny conditions is that as white grapes ripen, the acidity level drops. So if you grow the same white grape in one place that's not quite as sunny, the acidity is going to be more preserved than the wine that's made from grapes grown in a place that's sunny. So keep that in mind as we taste through these wines, and we're going to try to spot the one that's grown in the less sunny conditions. Going to be a little more tart, a little more acidic. All right, let's finally investigate. So we're going to start with the 2016 Seyval Blanc, and I'm going to go over the aromas very quickly because I've kept us thirsty for far too long. In case no one ever told you, the reason that we swirl the wine in the glass is just to seem fancy. I'm kidding. There's actually a good reason for it. So when you swirl the wine, the alcohol and all the flavors and everything get to slightly evaporate. So you're letting the aromas escape from the wine and collect in the glass, so you're able to pick out a little bit more nuances on the nose there. So I'll save our framework for when we actually taste. For now, in the aromas, just try to pick out some fruit first, and then any floral, herbal, or mineral characteristics. Definitely smelling some lemon. and some melon, like a tart green melon. Also, I want to say daisies, fresh cut grass, and mineral quality, like wet rocks. I'll give you those tips I promised after we taste it. You now officially have my virtual permission to take a sip, as if you haven't already. Cheers. So there's definitely one quality of this wine that stands out right away, kind of above all the others, and that's how amazingly like tart and refreshing it is. It's mouth-watering, like a nice lemonade on a hot day. That's what we mean by acidity in wine. It's kind of sour tasting, but it makes our mouth water, and it's thirst quenching and refreshing. It's interesting that this particular wine is still so nice and bright and acidic since it's already been in the bottle for almost 4 years. What usually happens as white wines age, such as Chardonnay, is that the flavor of the wine matures. It moves from being nice and vibrant and tart to a little bit more subtle and smooth in texture, but not so here. This is really nice and bright and lovely, perfect for a summer day. So, on to the other fruit flavors here besides just that acidic quality that we're encountering. And here's our useful framework for expanding our white wine tasting skills. So the fruit flavors and aroma in white wines typically fall into 3 different general categories: citrus, orchard fruit, and tropical fruit. Orchard fruit refers to apples, pears, peaches, and apricots. So if you're not quite sure what you're encountering in the aromas or the flavors of a white wine, just like ask yourself, okay, is there any citrus, any orchard fruit, any tropical fruit? And your imagination will help you fill in the rest. Or you can just go in order and ask yourself, okay, is there any citrus that I'm tasting, any tropical fruit? And I'll give you a tip that a master sommelier gave me when I was studying to earn my credentials. When it comes to white wine, lemon lime all the time, apple pear in there somewhere. Meaning, if you're not sure what you're tasting in a white wine, there's almost guaranteed to be some kind of citrus component as well as some kind of orchard fruit component. So you can just focus on that. We'll go in order for this first one and start out by asking, what kind of citrus elements are we tasting? Obviously, we know a few citrus fruits, so if you're having trouble picking out one in particular, just ask your imagination. Am I tasting any lemon, any lime, any grapefruit? I'd say lemon for this one. And then when you have a particular fruit picked out, you can ask your imagination to expand on that by asking about the color or the character of that fruit. So obviously all lemons are yellow, but you can ask yourself, well, is it like lemon zest? Is it like lemon juice? Is it almost sweet, like lemon curd? I'd say this is definitely pretty bright and zesty in character. Moving on to orchard fruit. Are we tasting any apple, any pear, apricot, or peaches? I'd say mostly in the apple and pear category. Apple pear in there somewhere, but let's get more specific and ask about the color and the character. I want to say like a green apple and green pear, almost specifically like the skins of each of those fruits. And then in terms of tropical fruit, are we tasting any pineapple? Maybe a bit. Any banana? No. Melon, definitely. And I want to say like a green melon. And then in terms of character, you can ask about different levels of ripeness. So we've got a green melon, but is it like a tart, unripe green melon? Is it a juicy, ripe one? Or is it like almost overripe or like baked tasting? Definitely nice and tart and almost underripe, but really refreshing here. So that's how you can kind of jog your own imagination to be able to pick out more nuanced fruit flavors in wine. Now, non-fruit flavors and aromas are a little bit more difficult to pick out since hopefully we probably do encounter fruit on a pretty regular basis, but we don't always stop and smell the flowers, least of all the grass and the rocks. I don't recommend eating flowers, grass, or rocks, but I do seriously recommend stopping and smelling all those things just so you can build a memory bank for yourself to better understand those flavors and aromas when you encounter them in wine. For now, I think the easiest way to jog your memory or jog your imagination to pick out these non-fruit characters are just to go in order and try to ask your imagination, is there any floral component here, any herbal component, any mineral component, and just see what you come up with. So, starting with floral, I was getting definitely on the nose, kind of like a yellow white flower character. So I asked my imagination, well, what are some yellowish whitish flowers? My imagination says daisies, and I'm like, sure, imagination, there's definitely a hint of daisy to this wine. So see, it's like an art as well as a science. And when you're just getting started, don't worry about like giving the wrong answer as you develop your skills. Just go for it. As for herbal elements, I'm definitely getting some like lemongrass and even just fresh cut green grass. And as for minerals, there's definitely a prevalent like limestone element, which personally I think is delicious. So keep all those elements in mind for this wine, and we'll try to decide after we taste all of them which was made from grapes grown in less sunny conditions. Remember, we're still doing that little detective work while we drink. Now, if you notice, I keep saying less sunny instead of colder, and there's an important viticultural subtlety to that as to why I'm saying less sunny instead of colder. So if we have any avid gardeners or, climatologists, this little tangent is for you. So almost all vineyards in Michigan are located within 25 miles of the lake because it's just best for vineyards to be close to large bodies of water, like the famous Bordeaux region of France is located right off of the Atlantic. Well, why would that be? I'm so glad you asked. So a large body of water serves to moderate the air temperature in the area surrounding it, because in the beginning of summer, for example, the water hasn't had a chance to warm up yet. It's still cool, and it releases some of its coolness into the surrounding air so that the air stays a little bit cool. And then likewise, the water has had a chance to heat up all summer. By the time it gets colder outside, the water is hot. It releases a bit of the heat, and again, moderates the temperature of the surrounding areas. So this lake effect is actually a very positive influence on grape growing because it makes the air temperature more consistent. Now, I bring all this up because those avid gardeners or climatologists might know that the first and last frost dates in south coastal Michigan are actually almost exactly the same as they are 300 miles south in southern Illinois, and the average temperature in both places is also almost exactly the same, which is kind of crazy because they're so far apart. But the thing that is different as you go from all the way up here in Michigan 300 miles south is the average amount of sunlight in the year. So as you move 300 miles south to the vineyard in southern Illinois that's featured somewhere here, you gain about 30 days of extra sunlight. And that's what's contributing to the differences in flavors that we're gonna taste here. So just had to make that distinction between temperature and sunlight, because even though the temperature is the same, in the sunnier place, the grapes get riper. So we'll be able to go through our next two wines much more quickly since I've already gotten most of my fun facts and clues and everything out of the way. So on to our 2017 Seyval Blanc next. We'll go in order again, honing our tasting and smelling skills. We're gonna swirl first to seem fancy, and then we're gonna ask, are there any citrus elements? I want to say lime for this one as opposed to lemon, almost kind of like a key lime. And then on to orchard fruits. Do we have some apple pear in there somewhere? I'd say pear, specifically green pear. And as for tropical fruits, I'm getting like a really rich, ripe, almost baked or overripe kind of pineapple. And as for floral, herbal, and mineral elements, the closest thing to floral that I'm getting is almost kind of like hay. And there's this interesting eucalyptus element that I'm getting, and I'm not really picking up too much minerality on the nose on this one. Let's taste it. Okay, so a little tiny bit of citrus in there, so still lemon lime all the time, but it's a little bit more subtle here as opposed to the first one. Not nearly as acidic tasting as the first one too. So a little tiny bit of lemon, almost kind of more like a lemon curd. As for orchard fruits, definitely apple pear in there. I'd say kind of more yellow and with a bit more matured of a character, not super tart, almost like baked or really, really ripe apples and pears. And finishing with tropical fruits. Definitely that rich pineapple that we were smelling, I'm getting here. And then in terms of floral, herbal, and mineral, I feel like I can taste a little bit of that hay, but it's like good and summery. It makes me want to like go ride a horse. And then there's this really interesting, almost kind of like, not vegetable note, but it's like a sweet cucumber that I haven't really encountered in many wines. So that's neat that we got this cucumber element in the 2017 here. So remember that this wasn't quite as acidic as our first wine, and we'll wait until after we've tasted the 2018 to make our decision as to which vintage features grapes grown entirely in Michigan. On to the 2018. So starting with the aromas, swirling for fanciness. This one's mostly fruit for me. Like, I'm not really smelling any floral, mineral, or herbal aspects. Remember what I said about how grapes grown in a place where they can get really ripe have mostly just fruit smells to them, or in tastes, not really much minerality. Keep that in mind. So in terms of citrus, I'm not really getting very much here. And orchard fruits, definitely the apple pear is in there somewhere. In terms of tropical, I think that's mostly what I'm getting, like pineapple, similar to the 2016. So on to the taste, or the palate as we call it to seem fancy. Not really much citrus, not very acidic or tart. It's really quite smooth. I want to say mostly pear I taste, specifically like a yellow pear, and then in terms of character, I want to say like baked or even like a poached yellow pear. Thanks, imagination. And the pineapple, I'm definitely getting that. Definitely very ripe, almost like a baked, like a pineapple cake or something. So just a touch of floral here. Almost like I would imagine how daffodils taste, although I've never eaten one, and maybe a little bit of hay. So remember, it's just as much an art as it is a science. So now we've had a chance to try all three. And we know that one is made entirely of grapes grown in southern Illinois, one made entirely of grapes grown in southern coastal Michigan, and one is a mix of the two. And we know that grapes grown in less sunny conditions will have more acidity and more tart fruit notes to them, as well as more herbal and mineral components, whereas wines that are made from grapes grown in sunnier conditions will have more overtly ripe fruit flavors and a little bit less minerality, as well as being smoother and less acidic. So, thinking back over our three wines and trying to decide which one comes from Michigan, or which one has grapes grown in Michigan, think back which one was the most acidic, which one had the most tart fruit characteristics. Take a minute to think about it, but go ahead and revisit if you so choose. It is the 2016, is made from grapes grown entirely in Michigan. I mean, that like tart, refreshing, acidic quality just really, really stands out. And so it was actually kind of, hopefully, pretty easy to spot this one. Now, extra points if you have a guess as to which one of these vintages features grapes grown entirely in southern Illinois. Which one had the most ripe, overt fruit qualities, and which one was the smoothest? Drum roll. Is the 2018 features grapes grown entirely in southern Illinois. Very ripe, very rich, very, very smooth. So I always like to point out that the cool thing about learning about wine isn't just knowledge for its own sake, although you might think it's interesting to understand the effects of different growing conditions on grapes and then wine. The actually useful thing about learning about all of this is that it allows you to better understand why you like what you like. And then when you know that, you can go find more delicious wine to drink. So there's no right or wrong answer if you prefer the more tart 2016 or if you prefer the more smooth 2018. It's all about what you like. But now, say you do like the 2016, and now you know that that acidity is coming from those kind of less sunny or cooler climate growing conditions, you can go out and try other white wines from similar conditions and they'll have that same delicious tartness that you like. Or maybe you learn that you prefer the more smooth, rich, fruity aspect that we had in the 2018. Now you can go out and look for other wines grown in warm, sunny conditions to have that similar fruity and smoothness to your wines. So to make that a little bit easier, I want to briefly explain one other thing, and that's the difference between New World and Old World wines. You might have heard people throwing these terms around trying to be fancy, but they're actually super duper simple. So Old World just refers to Europe. Any wine made in Europe is an Old World wine, whereas New World wines refer to wines made anywhere else in the world, like North or South America, Australia, New Zealand. The main difference between Europe and all these other places is that overall, it is less sunny and cooler in Europe than in all these other places. So, based on what we learned today, it should be pretty obvious that the European white wines are going to have more of that crisp acidity, whereas any white wine from the New World is going to be richer, fruitier, and smoother. So, I point that out because it's easy to spot, like, California, New Zealand, France on a label. So that'll be a good way of directing you towards more of whatever you decide that you like. So I want to finish with something that I know everyone enjoys, and that's food and wine pairings. So we've been talking a lot about acidity in white wine today. So I want to focus this little bit on pairing, on how to pair acidic or non-acidic white wines with food. Overall, in food and wine pairing, we want to think about balance. And the wine should be more acidic than the food, because if the food is more acidic than the wine's just going to taste flat. So if we have a rather acidic wine, we're going to want to balance that out with a food that's a little bit richer, a little bit sweeter, because the acidity will cut through the richness or the sweetness and preserve the zestiness of the wine, as well as creating balance. If we have a less acidic, more smooth and rich white wine, we'll want to create balance by pairing that with a less rich, less sweet dish. So smooth or rich whites go excellently with grilled poultry and are also very versatile with vegetables. And vegetables are kind of notoriously difficult in the sommelier world to pair, but any smooth, rich white, excellent with vegetables. If you have two wines that are rather similar, like our 2017 and 2018, another food and wine pairing principle to keep in mind is that you want to match any highlight flavors in a wine with highlight flavors in the food. Pinot Noir and mushrooms is the perfect example of this. There's like an inherent earthy, awesome mushroomy quality to Pinot Noir, so that makes it a great pairing with mushrooms. So let's apply these food and wine pairing principles to a little game. Sorry if you can hear the plane flying overhead. I'm going to give you 3 dishes, and you'll use what we just learned to figure out which dish should pair with which of our 3 wines from today. let's say we have a 3-course grilled summer meal. We're going to start out with a nice, bright, vibrant cucumber salad. Then for our entree, we have a grilled chicken and asparagus. And for dessert, we're going to indulge in some strawberry cheesecake. I'm going to ask you about the dessert pairing first because it's kind of the easiest. So if we have a rich, sweet cheesecake, is that going to go better with a smooth white or a more acidic white? Your more acidic white. The 2016 is definitely going to be the best pairing for the cheesecake because it'll create balance by kind of cutting through the richness of the cheesecake. And I want to ask about the appetizer next. So maybe you remember back, there was one kind of standout flavor that I mentioned in the 2017, like it has a little bit of a cucumber aspect. So we're going to pair it with the appetizer to highlight that cucumber element. And then for our grilled chicken and asparagus, our richest, smoothest white, the 2018, excellent pairing for that. Super versatile. But again, I want to point out these food and wine pairing principles are also art as well. Like it's a question of personal taste. It's all about what you like. So if you want, to have the 2016 with your chicken, go right ahead. The only wrong pairing would be a pairing that you didn't like. So one other pairing principle and alternative I want to suggest is the 2016 would be a great pairing if you were to start out a meal with any rich cheeses. Because again, the more acidic wine is going to cut through the richness of the food, and also starting a meal with a more acidic white wine is just a great choice because the acidity, it gets the palate ready, it gets the mouth watering, it just gets your taste buds ready for a nice big meal. So I really hope that you enjoyed everything that we learned today. I know it was a lot, but now you understand how different growing conditions affect grapes and affect the final taste of the wine. You know the difference between New World and Old World wines. You know the difference between a hybrid and a cross. You have this useful framework for expanding your white wine tasting skills, and you've got these great food and wine pairing principles to go pair these wines with amazing meals. So if you enjoyed this virtual tasting, there are going to be some more upcoming. For now, we are doing another vertical white wine tasting featuring 3 different vintages of our Vignole. And just check out our website, lynfredwinery.com, to stay tuned for more upcoming virtual guided tastings. And obviously, there's plenty of amazing wine on there for you to check out. So until next time, cheers! I'll see you soon.